Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. I drove down that familiar street, the golden sunset spilling long shadows across the low, squat rooftops. My old delivery truck creaked and groaned with every press of the gas pedal, sounding as worn out as I felt. The last package of the day sat haphazardly on the passenger seat, a small box wrapped in brown paper, its address scribbled in handwriting that looked like a child's. I glanced at it, then at the clock. 6:30 p.m. My phone buzzed again, and I didn't need to check it to know it was Mom. She'd texted 3 times already, her tone as sharp as ever. "Noah, come home for dinner tonight. Don't keep me waiting." Not a single word asking if I was tired or swamped. Just a command, like I was a cog in the monotonous schedule she'd already mapped out. I'm Noah, 28, a delivery driver for a small logistics company in Portland. The job's not bad, but it's nothing to brag about. Every day, I'm out before the sun rises, crisscrossing the city, dropping off packages in every corner and alley. By the time I get home, the sky's pitch black. The pay's enough to scrape by, covers my rent for a small room on the outskirts of town, and lets me send a little money back to my parents now and then. But in my family's eyes, I'm nothing. Not because I've done anything wrong, but because I'm not Ezra. Ezra's my younger brother, 3 years my junior, and the pride of the family. He's got this dazzling smile that makes people trust him the second they meet him. He talks like an actor, always knowing how to make people laugh, how to make them gloss over his screw-ups. Even as kids, Mom called him the golden boy. Me? No matter how hard I tried, I was just the clumsy older brother. I remember one night, years ago, sitting at the dinner table. Mom was dishing out her homemade lasagna, beaming at Ezra as he told some story about school. I'd just gotten a perfect score on a math test, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd notice. I slid the paper across the table, trying to catch her eye. "Hey, Mom, look at this," I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She glanced at it, barely, before turning back to Ezra. "That's nice, Noah," she said, her tone flat. Then she looked at my brother, her eyes lighting up. "Ezra, tell me more about that project you're working on." I pushed my plate away, appetite gone. Later that night, I overheard her talking to Dad in the kitchen. "Ezra was born to do great things," she said, her voice full of pride. "Noah, he just needs to work hard, and that's enough." Her words sounded gentle, but they cut like a rusty knife, stinging every time they came back to me. I don't entirely blame Ezra, at least not completely. He didn't choose to be the favorite, but sometimes I wonder if I'd been treated fairly, would I be living a different life? A life where I didn't wake up every day feeling like I'm the shadow of my own brother? Today's Friday, the day Mom always insists I come home for dinner. "Family needs to gather," she says, but I know that gathering is never about me. It's Ezra's stage, where he talks about his grand plans, his startup projects that I never fully understand. I just sit there, eating cold rice, nodding when Mom asks me something, trying not to notice when Dad brags about Ezra to the neighbors over the phone. I pulled over in front of a convenience store a few blocks from home to deliver that last package. The evening breeze was cool, but sweat still clung to my forehead. The recipient was a middle-aged woman with bright red dyed hair. She took the package with a weary smile. "You work hard, don't you?" she said, her voice kind. I nodded, unsure how to respond. "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled, scratching the back of my neck. Compliments like that are rare, and I'm not used to them. When I got back to the truck, my phone buzzed. Another text from Mom. "Ezra says he has a big surprise tonight. Come home early. Don't keep the family waiting." I sighed, shoving the phone into my pocket. A big surprise. Probably another grandiose story from Ezra. A new project, a promising relationship, or maybe just a new pair of shoes that Mom will gush over. I'm not jealous, really, but I'm tired. Tired of always having to play the understanding older brother, the one who's never allowed to complain. My parents' house is in an old neighborhood where the houses are packed close together, their walls stained, their iron fences rusted. I parked in front of the gate, turned off the engine, and sat still for a moment. The sound of distant car horns mixed with the barking of a dog somewhere nearby. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my tired eyes, dark circles etched deep, as if I hadn't slept enough in years. "Just one dinner, Noah," I told myself. "Eat, then go home." Stepping inside, the rich aroma of braised pork hit me. Mom was bustling in the kitchen, Dad was lounging in his armchair, eyes glued to the TV. Ezra wasn't there yet. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to sound upbeat. He grunted, not looking up from the screen. Mom turned around, looked me up and down, and frowned. You're working late again, aren't you? Look at that dirty shirt. Go wash your face before Ezra gets home and sees his brother looking so sloppy. I nodded and trudged upstairs. My old room was now just a storage space for random junk, but on a shelf, I spotted an old framed photo. Mom, Dad, Ezra, and me, taken when I was 15 and Ezra was 12. I stood behind him, my arm around his shoulders, both of us grinning brightly. Back then, I thought I was the big brother, his protector. Now, I don't know what I am anymore. When I came back downstairs, Ezra had arrived, sitting at the dining table, his white dress shirt crisp, hair slicked back with gel. Yo, big bro, he called out, flashing a wide grin. Long time no see. You doing okay? I nodded and sat across from him. Yeah, I'm fine, I said, keeping it short. Ezra always called me big bro in that joking tone, like I was a side character in his story. Dinner began. Mom brought out the braised pork and placed it right in front of Ezra. Your favorite, right? She asked, her voice soft, like she was talking to a child. Ezra nodded and launched into his big project, some crypto startup, throwing around buzzwords like blockchain, investment, the future. I didn't understand much of it. Dad nodded along, his eyes lighting up. This kid's got vision, he said, then turned to me. What about you, Noah? Delivery job still going okay? It's fine, I replied curtly, not wanting to elaborate. Even if I did, they wouldn't really listen. Fine's good, Mom chimed in, but her tone carried a hint of pity, like she was consoling a loser. Just keep working hard, and things will be okay. I swallowed a bite of rice, trying to ignore the way she emphasized working hard, as if that's all I'm capable of. Ezra kept talking, his voice growing more animated. I noticed he looked thinner than the last time I saw him, his eyes slightly red, his fingers tapping restlessly on the table like he couldn't sit still. Something felt off, but I wasn't sure what. Then, as Mom was praising Ezra's business talent, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face tightening for a split second, then stood up. Got to take this call, he said, disappearing into the backyard. I watched him go, a sense of unease creeping in. Ezra had been getting calls like this a lot lately. Always secretive, always brief, always followed by a forced smile when he returned. The last time I'd seen him in the backyard, talking about goods and payments, I asked what it was about. Just business, he'd said with a laugh, brushing it off. But this time, I noticed Mom watching him too, her brows slightly furrowed, though she quickly turned to me and changed the subject. Noah, have you sent money home this week? She asked, her tone as casual as if she were asking about the weather. I nodded, though it stung inside. Yeah, I sent it Monday, I said quietly. I send money home faithfully every month, but I've never heard a word of thanks. Meanwhile, Ezra never has to contribute a dime, yet he always has cash for new clothes, dining out, or driving that sleek sports car no one knows how he affords. Ezra returned, his smile back in place, but I noticed his hand trembling slightly as he picked up his chopsticks. Everything okay? I asked, trying to sound normal. He looked at me, his eyes flashing with something, worry, maybe anger, I couldn't tell. All good, big bro. Just work stuff, he said, smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. Dinner ended, and I washed the dishes as usual. Mom never asks Ezra to do it. As I dried my hands, preparing to leave, Ezra pulled me aside into a corner of the room. Hey, you free tomorrow? He asked, his voice low. What's up? I replied, a bit surprised. He hesitated, then shrugged. Nothing big. Just, could you help me deliver something? It's small, won't take long. I looked at him, that uneasy feeling rising again. Deliver what? I asked. He grinned and clapped my shoulder. Just a package. Don't worry, I'll explain tomorrow. He walked off before I could press further, leaving me standing there with a bad feeling I couldn't shake. That night, lying on the single bed in my cramped rented room, I couldn't sleep. Images of Ezra with stacks of cash, those secretive phone calls, kept swirling in my head. I told myself I was overthinking. Ezra was just a spoiled little brother, not a criminal. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right, and I was afraid, not for Ezra, but for myself. Because I knew if something went wrong, I'd be the one left holding the bag. The next morning, I woke to the shrill buzz of my alarm clock, like a trapped insect screaming for release. 5:30 a.m. The sky was still pitch black, my cramped rented room smelling of stale coffee and the damp mustiness of stained walls. I lay still for a moment, trying to recall last night's dream, but all I could see was Ezra, his forced smile, his evasive eyes, his words from last night, deliver something, lingering in my mind like a discordant note that refused to fade. I shook my head, telling myself I was overthinking. Ezra might be a spoiled brat, but he wouldn't get involved in anything too bad, would he? I threw on an old t-shirt, grabbed my baseball cap, and headed out to the truck. Another day, another loop. But today, I felt heavier than usual, like something was off, like hearing a strange noise in the house in the dead of night. While eating breakfast, I texted Ezra a short message. "What's that package? I'm busy today." No reply. I shoved the phone into my pocket, started the truck, and got to work. The day passed in a blur of honking horns, gasoline fumes, and dusty streets. I delivered package after package, trying not to think about Ezra, but every time my phone buzzed, I flinched, hoping it was him, only to see messages from the company or Mom reminding me to come home for dinner. "Ezra has something important to discuss," she wrote. Always Ezra. I sighed, wondering if there'd ever be a day when my family talked about me, even just once. By the afternoon, Ezra finally texted back, "Big bro, swing by the house at 6 p.m. It's just a small package. Just help me deliver it. Thanks." I frowned, my thumb hovering over the screen, tempted to ask more, but I let it go. Maybe it was just something for his project. I didn't want to argue or hear Mom scold me for being jealous of my little brother. "All right," I replied, then pocketed the phone. As the sunset fell, I drove toward my parents' house. The familiar street now felt strange, like it was hiding a secret. I parked at the end of the alley, checking the truck's cargo area out of habit. Everything was as usual, a few leftover boxes, a toolbox, and a half-empty water bottle. I closed the hatch, locked the truck, and walked inside. The smell of beef stew wafted from the kitchen, mingling with Mom's muttering about Ezra being late again. Dad was in his armchair, flipping through a newspaper, but I knew he wasn't really reading, just pretending to look busy to avoid talking to me. "Noah, you're here," Mom called from the kitchen, her voice cheerful but tinged with something forced. "Go wash your face. Ezra will be back soon, and we'll eat." I nodded and headed upstairs, splashing water on my face to wash away the day's grime. A little later, Ezra showed up, wearing a black hoodie, a departure from his usual polished look. His eyes were bloodshot, like he'd been up for nights on end. "Yo, big bro," he called, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. I sat down, studying him. "Where's the package?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He blinked, then grinned. "Oh, I'll give it to you after dinner. No rush." Dinner began, but the atmosphere was heavier than usual. Mom kept asking Ezra about his crypto project, but he answered vaguely, his eyes glued to his phone. Dad stayed silent, nodding only when Mom praised Ezra. I ate without tasting anything, the beef stew sticking in my throat. "Ezra, are you okay?" Mom asked, her voice tinged with worry. He nodded, but I noticed his hand gripping his phone tightly under the table. "Yeah, I'm fine," he mumbled. Then everything happened so fast I could barely process it. The piercing wail of police sirens cut through the air from the end of the alley, sharp as a knife. Heavy footsteps followed, then urgent pounding on the door. Mom jumped up, her face pale. "What's going on?" she screamed, rushing to the door. I looked at Ezra, but he didn't lift his head, just sat there, still clutching his phone. The door flew open, and 3 police officers stormed in, their dark blue uniforms and cold eyes commanding the room. "Noah Watson," one of them barked, his voice hard as steel. I nodded, my heart pounding. "That's me," I said, my voice barely steady. "We need to check your truck." "Open the cargo area," the officer ordered. I stood, my legs like lead. "What's this about?" I asked, but the officer only repeated, "Open the cargo area." I led them to the truck, Mom and Dad trailing behind. Mom's face was ashen, and Dad muttered something about a mistake. Ezra didn't follow, but I saw him standing at the door, his silhouette faint under the streetlight. I opened the cargo hatch, my heart hammering so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. One officer leaned in and pulled out a small plastic bag filled with smaller packets of white powder. I froze, as if the blood in my veins had stopped flowing. "What's this?" the officer asked, holding up the bag. I shook my head, my voice breaking. I don't know. That's not mine." But their eyes didn't believe me. They cuffed me, the metal biting into my wrists. Mom screamed, but not to defend me. "This has to be a mistake. My son wouldn't do this," she wailed, but her eyes weren't on me, they were on Ezra. They pushed me into the police car, my mind spinning. In the brief moment before the door slammed shut, I saw Ezra standing there, eyes downcast, refusing to meet mine. And I knew, in that instant, that the package he'd asked me to deliver wasn't harmless. At the detention center, the fluorescent lights burned my eyes. I sat on a cold metal bench, my hands still cuffed. The officer across from me spoke in a flat, rehearsed tone. "Noah, we found a large quantity of drugs in your truck. You know what they are, don't you? Tell the truth, it'll be better for you." "I don't know," I repeated, my voice hoarse. "I swear, I don't know where they came from." But my words carried no weight. I was just a delivery driver. No money, no power, no one to back me up. Then my parents arrived, standing behind the glass. Mom was crying, Dad frowning with his hands in his pockets. The officer left, leaving me alone with them. I looked at Mom, waiting for an explanation, an apology, anything. But she only whispered, her voice trembling, Noah, you have to take the fall. Ezra can't go to jail. He has a future ahead of him. You're stronger. The lawyer will handle it, and you'll get a reduced sentence. I stared at her, feeling like my heart was being crushed. What did you say? I asked, my voice breaking. Dad cut in, his tone firm. Listen to your mother. This is for the family. Ezra wouldn't survive it. You can. I looked at them, the people I called my parents, but now they felt like strangers. No apology, no explanation, just them wanting me to take the blame. I thought of Ezra, his eyes last night, the stacks of cash, the secretive calls. And then it hit me. This wasn't an accident. It was a setup, and I was the pawn. I'm not pleading guilty, I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. Mom froze, then burst into tears. Noah, you can't do this. Do you want to destroy this family? I didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I looked at them and felt no need to please them anymore. The next morning, I was taken to the courtroom at the Multnomah County Courthouse in Portland. The air inside was frigid, despite the July heat scorching the world outside. I sat on the defendant's bench, my worn-out sneakers scraping against the polished wooden floor, my hands still numb from the cuffs I'd worn since last night. In front of me was Howard, the court-appointed lawyer, a middle-aged man with disheveled hair and glasses slipping down his nose, flipping through a stack of papers as if he knew nothing about my case. He'd met me for exactly 15 minutes before the hearing began. Noah, you should plead guilty, he said, his voice flat and rehearsed. The evidence is clear. Plead guilty, and you'll get a lighter sentence. I shook my head, trying to explain. The drugs in my truck weren't mine. I was set up. He just shrugged. You say that, but the jury won't care, he said, then turned away, his eyes glued to his phone. I looked out at the public seating, hoping to see Mom or Dad, but only Ezra was there, sitting in the far corner, head bowed, hands clasped tightly as if hiding something. He didn't look at me, not once. My parents didn't show up. I pictured them at home in the familiar kitchen, still tinged with the smell of barbecue, probably comforting each other that everything would be fine. But fine for who? Certainly not for me. The prosecutor, a petite woman with a voice sharp as a blade, stood up. Noah Watson, 28-year-old delivery driver, she declared, but the way she said it made me sound like a seasoned criminal. The defendant used his job to conceal drug trafficking activities, she said, holding up the bag of white powder, the damning evidence, before the jury. I wanted to scream that it wasn't mine, that I had no idea where it came from, but Howard put a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Don't do anything stupid." I clenched my jaw, a wave of helplessness crashing over me. The trial dragged on for 3 days, but to me, it felt like an endless nightmare. Howard did little beyond sitting quietly, occasionally jotting a few notes. The prosecutor, meanwhile, was relentless, presenting photos of my truck, the bag of drugs, and my delivery records as if they proved I ran a sophisticated criminal network. The defendant had the opportunity, the means, and the motive, she said, her voice icy. Motive? I was just a driver, working from dawn to dusk, sending money home to my parents, dreaming of a small coffee shop. What motive could I possibly have? I testified that I knew nothing about the drugs, that someone had set me up, but when the prosecutor asked who, I fell silent. Mr. Watson, do you have a name? She pressed, her eyes boring into me. I thought of Ezra, his evasive eyes that night, my mother's whispered words. Ezra wouldn't survive it. I wanted to point at him, to say my own brother had put me here, but I couldn't. Not because I wanted to protect him, but because I knew even if I spoke, no one would believe me. I was just Noah, the clumsy older brother, the one my family never took seriously. On the final day of the trial, the judge, a silver-haired man with a stern face, delivered the verdict. Noah Watson, you are sentenced to 2 years in prison for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. The gavel struck the bench like a guillotine. I stood frozen, my mind blank. Ezra was still there in the back row, but he didn't look up as I was led away. I turned, hoping to catch his eye, hoping for a hint of remorse, but he just stood and left the courtroom, his figure disappearing behind the heavy wooden door. The iron door slammed shut, the clang of metal echoing like a hammer blow. I stood in the middle of a cold cell, the flickering fluorescent light casting shadows on the gray concrete walls. The stench of mildew and stale sweat hit me, making my stomach churn. My hands, still numb from the cuffs, hung limp as I sat on the edge of the bed, a thin mattress on a steel frame, hard as stone. This was Multnomah County Jail, Portland, Oregon, my new home for the next 2 years. Me, Noah Watson, 28 years old, delivery driver, now a convicted felon for drug possession with intent to distribute, a crime I had nothing to do with. Prison was a world utterly alien to me. The first days were a nightmare. I didn't know how to survive here. My fellow inmates eyed me like fresh prey, their gazes half curious, half threatening. A burly guy with tattoos covering his arms always stood in the corner of the yard, watching me as if deciding whether to start trouble. I kept to myself, avoiding eye contact, never lingering on anyone too long. But every night, lying on that hard mattress, I couldn't sleep. Images of Mom crying, Dad's silence, and Ezra's bowed head played on a loop, like a movie I couldn't stop. I asked myself what I'd done wrong. I'd worked hard, sent money home, tried to be a good brother. So why was I here, while Ezra was free, probably still eating dinner with Mom and Dad, spinning tales about his grand crypto projects? The first week, I barely spoke to anyone. I ate the bland trays of food, dry bread, stewed beans, and some nameless sauce, then retreated to my cell, curling up in the dark. I thought about my dream of opening a coffee shop, a small place filled with the warm aroma of roasted beans, where I could be myself, not Ezra's shadow. But that dream now felt as fanciful as a fairy tale. I had nothing, no money, no family, no future. Then one day, during yard time, I met Daniel. He was about 50, with salt and pepper hair and deep-set eyes, a scar running across his left cheek. He sat alone on a concrete bench, reading a tattered book, looking like he didn't belong here. I hadn't planned to talk, but Daniel looked at me, squinted, and said, "You're not a drug dealer, are you?" I flinched, unsure how to respond. "How do you know?" I asked, my voice raspy from days of silence. Daniel smiled, a tired but sharp smile. "I used to be an accountant for a crew in Seattle. I know how to read people. You've got the look of someone who got screwed over." He closed his book and handed it to me. It was a basic law book, its cover worn and torn but filled with handwritten notes. "Read it," he said. "If you want to get out of here and do something, you've got to learn how to play their game." I took the book, unsure if I should trust him, but that night, in the dim light of my cell, I opened it. The yellowed pages detailed cases, criminal law, and how the justice system worked. I read line by line, word by word, as if it were the only way to stay sane. I didn't understand everything, but each night I read a little more, jotting down notes when I could. Daniel became my reluctant mentor. He didn't just teach me about law. He taught me about tracing money, something he'd done for his old crew. "Money always leaves a trail," he said, pointing to a page of notes on money laundering. "If someone set you up, they can't hide forever." I started thinking about Ezra, the stacks of cash I'd seen him with, the late-night calls, the sports car he drove despite having no steady job. I remembered his averted gaze when the police showed up, the way he'd bowed his head, as if he knew what was coming. And then I recalled Mom's words. Ezra wouldn't survive it. A piece of the puzzle began to form, but it was too painful to accept. My family hadn't just abandoned me, they were complicit. The more I read, the more a small spark of determination flickered inside me. Not anger, but resolve. If I had to be here, I wouldn't drown in despair. I got access to the prison library, borrowing books on law, accounting, and old articles about drug cases. I took meticulous notes, day after day, night after night, on scraps of paper Daniel gave me. I learned to analyze financial transactions, to spot holes in business records. Daniel watched me, sometimes nodding, sometimes smiling. "You've got potential, Noah," he said. "But be careful. The law is a double-edged sword." By the third month, I started keeping a journal, not to vent, but to record everything I remembered about Ezra. The late-night calls, the secret meetings in the backyard, the crypto project he bragged about. I didn't know what I'd do with these notes, but they made me feel like I still had some control, however small. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Mom, her shaky handwriting scrawled on yellow lined paper. She wrote that she missed me, that she prayed for me every day, but not a single apology, not a word of explanation. She only asked if I was okay and mentioned that Ezra was doing well in business, that he'd just bought a new TV for the house. I read it, folded the letter, and tucked it under the corner of my mattress. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say to someone who'd chosen my brother over me. Daniel saw me sitting quietly and asked, "Family?" I nodded. He shrugged. "Family can be your strength, but it can also be your weakest link. You have to choose, live for them or live for yourself." I looked at him, then at the law book in my hands. For the first time, I felt like I had an answer. 18 months passed, and I was no longer the Noah who'd first walked into this prison. I was thinner, my hair longer, but my eyes were different. I wasn't the resigned older brother ready to sacrifice for family. I'd learned to see the world through the lens of law and truth. As my release date approached, I knew I wouldn't return to my old life. Ezra, Mom, Dad. They'd pushed me into this place, but I would walk out stronger than they ever imagined. The day I walked out of Multnomah County Jail, the Portland sky was a dull gray, with a light drizzle stinging my face like tiny needles. I stood in front of the iron gate, wearing an old hoodie and tattered sneakers handed back by the guard, clutching a plastic bag with my few belongings, a worn notebook, a pen, and a faded family photo with creased corners. I looked around, foolishly hoping someone would be waiting, Mom, Dad, or even Ezra, but the road outside was empty, save for the rumble of a passing truck and the smell of wet asphalt. I took a deep breath, a mix of freedom and loneliness washing over me like a wave. 18 months in prison had changed me, but the world outside didn't seem to care. I walked to the nearest bus stop, the plastic bag rustling in my hand. No one knew I was getting out today because I hadn't told anyone. Mom had sent another letter a few months back, asking if I was okay, mentioning that Ezra had rented a new apartment downtown. Not a word of apology, not a hint of explanation. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because prison had taught me something. Family isn't everything, and I couldn't live just to please them anymore. I found a job at a small coffee shop called Brew Haven, tucked away on Belmont Street, a few miles from downtown Portland. The work was simple, brewing coffee, wiping tables, and chatting just enough with customers to keep them happy. The owner, a middle-aged guy named Ray, didn't ask about my past. "You work hard. That's enough?" he said when he handed me my uniform. I nodded, feeling for the first time in my life that someone was looking at me without comparing me to Ezra. By day, I stood behind the counter at Brew Haven, learning to make lattes and listening to customers ramble about their petty dramas. By night, I returned to my new rented apartment, a room even smaller than my cell, with creaky wooden floors and a window overlooking a parking lot. But it was mine, and that was enough to make me feel like I was starting over. In that room, I opened my prison notebook, its pages filled with handwritten notes on law, accounting, and fragments of memories about Ezra. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but I knew I couldn't let the past bury me. One evening after my shift, I sat in front of an old laptop I'd bought from a secondhand shop and started searching. I typed Ezra Watson into Google, and a slew of articles popped up. Young entrepreneur with big potential, breakout crypto startup. Glossy headlines about Ezra's company, Watson Ventures. I clicked on one, seeing a photo of Ezra in a sharp gray suit, flashing that same confident smile. The article said his company specialized in cryptocurrency investments, promising high returns for investors. But something felt off. Ezra, the kid who'd blown through our parents' savings on a sports car, was now a successful entrepreneur? I didn't buy it. I remembered Daniel's words from prison, "Money always leaves a trail." I dug deeper, using the skills he'd taught me. I looked up Watson Ventures records on the Oregon Secretary of State's website. Public documents showed the company was registered a year ago, after I'd gone to prison. Ezra was listed as CEO, but there were other names on the board, people I'd never heard of. I searched further, scouring Reddit forums about crypto, where users discussed shady projects. One anonymous post mentioned Watson Ventures, calling it a Ponzi scheme in disguise. My heart raced. I didn't know what a Ponzi scheme was, but I could guess. I wrote down everything, the company's name, registration date, and forum comments. I started learning to read financial statements, though they were more complex than I'd expected. I borrowed books from the public library, Basic Library on Accounting, Understanding Money Laundering, and Laundering. I spent hours each night analyzing them. I wasn't an expert, but I knew how to be patient. 18 months in prison had taught me that. One night, I nearly got caught. I was sitting in a small bar near Watson Ventures' office. Pretending to sip a beer while keeping an eye out. Ezra walked in, not alone. He was with a tall guy in a leather jacket, his head shaved close. They sat in a dim corner, speaking in hushed tones. I saw Ezra pull out a thick envelope and slide it across the table. The other guy checked it quickly, nodded, and left. My heart pounded. I ducked my head, pulling my cap low, afraid Ezra would spot me. Luckily, he didn't look my way, but as he left the bar, I saw his eyes tense, anxious, nothing like the confident entrepreneur. I went home, my hands shaking as I wrote down what I'd seen. The envelope, Ezra's expression, the name Watson Ventures. It was all starting to connect. I dug deeper online, this time into crypto transactions. I found a blockchain wallet linked to Watson Ventures with a series of transfers to offshore accounts, places like the Cayman Islands, which Daniel had called a haven for money laundering. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but each piece of information was a puzzle piece, and I knew I was getting closer to the truth. From that day on, I worked, studied, and investigated. Every night, I sat at my laptop, organizing my notes into a file. Watson Ventures transactions, the shady names, the blockchain wallet addresses. I didn't know what I'd do with it all, but I knew I couldn't stop. Ezra had put me in prison, and my family had left me to rot. Now, I would be the one to decide my own fate. The rain kept falling lightly outside the window of my small apartment, droplets sliding down the glass, blurring like the memories I tried to forget. I sat in front of my old laptop, the blue glow of the screen casting light on my face, illuminating the scattered stack of notes on the table. Those pages, filled with handwritten lines, numbers, and blockchain wallet addresses, were the result of months of relentless work. They were my weapon, not a gun or a knife, but the truth, meticulously organized like a deck of cards, ready to take down Ezra. I was no longer the Noah Watson of 18 months ago, the submissive older brother who went to prison for someone else's crime. I had learned to see the world through Daniel's lens, the prison friend who told me, money always leaves a trail. And Ezra, my little brother, had left far too many trails. His company, Watson Ventures, wasn't the promising crypto startup the articles hyped it up to be. It was a front, a complex money laundering machine, and I had spent every night unraveling it. It all started with small pieces. After that night I nearly got caught at the bar, I became more cautious. I stopped going near Watson Ventures' office and focused on gathering information remotely. I scoured public websites, checked company records on the Oregon Secretary of State's site, and dug deep into crypto forums on Reddit and Telegram. An anonymous Reddit post hinted that Watson Ventures was involved in shady transactions, and I followed that lead. I uncovered a chain of blockchain transactions from Watson Ventures' wallet, funneled through dozens of intermediary accounts, ultimately landing in offshore banks in the Cayman Islands. Daniel had told me about places like that, havens for money launderers. I wasn't an expert, but I was patient. I spent hours analyzing transactions, cross-referencing them with Watson Ventures' public financial reports. I found discrepancies, suspiciously high revenues, unexplained expenses, and investments with no clear contracts. I documented everything, day after day, hour after hour, on pages now filled with ink. I also found names of people involved, investors in Ezra's company, who, upon further research, turned out to be individuals previously investigated for drug trafficking in Seattle and Los Angeles. The final piece was a leaked email on a hacker forum where Ezra promised delivery on time to someone named Rico. I didn't know who Rico was, but the word delivery sent a chill down my spine. It brought me back to that fateful night when Ezra asked me to deliver a package. I knew I had to act, but I had to be careful. If I confronted Ezra directly, he'd deny everything, and my family would side with him again. I didn't want a loud fight. I wanted the truth to speak for itself, to defeat Ezra in a way no one could dispute. I started building an anonymous dossier, a thick file of every piece of evidence I'd collected, blockchain transactions, company records, the leaked email, and the list of questionable investors. I organized them chronologically, clearly labeled, just as Daniel had taught me. If you want to take down an enemy, do it professionally, he'd said one night in prison. One night, I sat in front of my laptop, my hand hovering over the keyboard. I had found the email addresses for the IRS, the DEA, and the local prosecutor's office in Portland. I wrote an anonymous letter, short but clear. I have evidence of money laundering and drug trafficking activities related to Watson Ventures, a company in Portland. Please review the attached documents. I attached a PDF of the entire dossier, double-checking every page to ensure I left no trace of myself. I used a temporary email created through an anonymous service and hit send. When I did, my heart pounded, but not from fear. It was relief, like dropping a heavy stone from my chest. Then I waited. I kept working at Brew Haven, brewing coffee, wiping tables, and smiling at customers as if nothing was happening. But every day, I checked the news, scouring local papers and crypto forums. A month passed, then two. I started to think my dossier had been ignored, that Ezra was too clever to get caught. But then one morning, as I was making a latte for a customer, my phone buzzed with a news alert about Watson Ventures. I opened my laptop, searching for more, and there it was on the front page of the Oregonian. Startup Watson Ventures under investigation for suspected money laundering. The article said the IRS and DEA had frozen the company's accounts, and Ezra Watson, the CEO, was being questioned. I read it over and over, feeling like my heart had stopped. It had begun. Within days, everything crumbled like a sandcastle. Ezra was arrested at his office, images of him in handcuffs, face pale, flashing across the evening news. Watson Ventures investors sued the company, demanding their money back. Rumors spread like wildfire on crypto forums, calling Watson Ventures Portland's biggest scam. I sat in my apartment, watching the news, and felt a strange calm. Not gloating satisfaction, but the sense that justice had been served. A week later, I read that Ezra had been charged with money laundering and second-degree drug trafficking, facing up to 15 years in prison. I also heard from an old friend near my parents' house that Mom and Dad had to mortgage their home to pay for a lawyer, but I knew it was futile. The dossier I'd sent was too tight, too clear. Ezra couldn't escape. After learning that my brother had been sentenced to 15 years in prison, I decided to visit him in jail and tell him the truth. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, and I wore my familiar gray hoodie, a baseball cap, and carried the notebook that had been with me since my days in prison. I didn't call ahead or give any warning. Ezra didn't know I'd been released, didn't know what I was doing or how I was living. He'd never asked, never cared. His indifference didn't surprise me, but it still stung, like an old wound that hadn't healed. At the prison gate, I filled out the visitor form as family. The guard recognized me. "How you doing, Noah?" he asked, his tone casual, before leading me down a long hallway. "I'm managing," I replied, keeping it short. The familiar smell of mildew, metal, and despair hit me, bringing back memories of the months I'd spent locked up here. I was taken to the visitation room, a small space divided by thick glass. I sat down, staring through the pane, waiting. My heart pounded, but not out of fear. I was ready. Ezra walked in, wearing an orange prison jumpsuit, much thinner than the last time I saw him. His hair was disheveled, his eyes sunken, his face pale and lifeless. When he saw me, his eyes widened in shock. "Noah," he whispered through the microphone, his voice faint. "You're out. Why are you here?" I looked at him, not answering right away. Ezra sat down, his hands clasped tightly on the table, his eyes flickering between confusion and anxiety. "I've been out for 3 months," I said, my voice calm. "But you didn't know, did you? You didn't ask, didn't care. Just like Mom and Dad." Ezra lowered his head, his lips pressed tight. I continued, my voice steady. "I'm not here to forgive you. I'm here so you know the truth. I'm the one who sent the dossier to the IRS and DEA. I found everything. Watson Ventures, the dirty money, all of it. I put you here." Ezra looked up, his face ashen. "You what?" he stammered, as if he couldn't believe it. "Why, Noah? I'm your brother," Ezra said, his voice breaking. I gave a dry laugh, feeling like my heart was being squeezed. "Brother," I repeated. "You let me rot in prison for 2 years for your crime. You didn't call, didn't write, didn't once ask how I was. Did you think I'd always be the pushover big brother?" Ezra broke down, crying, but I felt no pity. "I didn't want this," he said, his voice trembling. "They forced me, Noah. The people I worked with, they said if I didn't throw the police off, they'd kill me. Mom and Dad said you'd be fine, that you were stronger." I cut him off, my voice sharp as a blade. "Stronger? That's their excuse, and yours. But the truth is, you chose yourself, and they chose you." I had to pick myself up. I paused, looking straight into his eyes. "Now you have to pay, Ezra. Not because of me, but because of what you did." Ezra bowed his head, sobbing. I stood up, saying nothing more. "Take care of yourself," I said, then walked out of the room. His cries echoed behind the glass, but I didn't look back. I'd given him a chance, and he'd abandoned me. Now it was time to let go. A few days later, I drove to the old neighborhood where my parents' house once felt like the center of my world. Now it looked worn, its paint peeling, the iron fence rusted. I didn't call or warn them. They didn't know I was out of prison, didn't know what I was doing. Their silence, no calls, no letters in 18 months, was proof enough. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding, not from fear, but because I knew this was the last time I'd face them. Mom opened the door, her hair grayer than I remembered, her face etched with worry lines. She froze when she saw me, her hand trembling on the doorknob. "Noah," she whispered, as if seeing a ghost. What are you doing here? You're out." Dad appeared behind her, his eyes tired, his hair now fully white. "Noah," he said, his voice low. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at them, the two people who once meant everything to me, now as distant as strangers. "I've been out for 3 months," I said calmly. "But you didn't know because you didn't ask. You didn't care, did you?" Only Ezra mattered. Mom burst into tears, but I didn't waver. "Noah, I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "But Ezra, he's in despair. He's been sentenced to 15 years. You're smart, you're educated, you know the law. Can you help him?" Dad nodded, his eyes pleading. "You're his brother, Noah. Family helps each other." I shook my head, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "I used to be his brother," I said. "But when you chose him over me, when you let me go to prison for his crime, I learned to live for myself." I paused, looking them in the eyes. "And you know what? I'm the one who put Ezra in prison. I found everything. The dirty money, the transactions, all of it. I sent the evidence to the IRS and DEA. I did it for justice." Mom collapsed into a chair, hands covering her face, sobbing. Dad stood frozen, his eyes misty, as if he couldn't believe it. "How could you?" he whispered. "He's your brother." I gave a dry laugh, my voice steady. "I stopped being his brother and your son the day you let me take the fall for him." I turned and walked out. Mom called after me, her voice desperate. "Noah, come back." But I didn't stop. I stepped into the street, the rare Portland sunlight filtering through the trees, the breeze carrying the scent of dry leaves and coming rain. I didn't look back, didn't think of Ezra, Mom, or Dad. I just kept walking, clutching my notebook filled with plans for my own coffee shop, a faint smile on my lips. Justice had been served, and this time, I wrote the ending. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.